Pete Hegseth just got humiliated. The defense secretary who's been calling everyone woke lemmings for removing Confederate monuments. The same guy who's been erasing black soldiers from World War II history. He just announced he's spending $10 million to restore a Confederate monument at Arlington National Cemetery. A monument that features an enslaved woman holding a white officer's baby. A monument that shows an enslaved man following his master to war. And he's doing it while simultaneously removing memorial panels honoring actual black American heroes who liberated Europe from fascism. The hypocrisy is staggering, the priorities are clear, and the backlash is brutal. On August 5, 2025, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced on social media that the Confederate Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery would be restored and reinstalled. The monument had been removed in December 2023 on the recommendation of the Congressional Naming Commission, a bipartisan panel created by Congress specifically to remove Confederate symbols from military property. I'm proud to announce that Moses Ezekiel's beautiful and historic sculpture, often referred to as the Reconciliation Monument, will be rightfully returned to Arlington National Cemetery, Hegseth posted on X. Then came the attack. It never should have been taken down by woke lemmings. Unlike the left, we don't believe in erasing American history. We honor it, woke lemmings. That's what Hegseth called the Bipartisan Congressional Commission. That's what he called everyone who believes that a monument glorifying slavery doesn't belong at America's most sacred military cemetery. But here's where the humiliation comes in. While Hegseth was calling people woke lemmings for removing a Confederate monument, his own Pentagon was actively erasing black soldiers from history. Not Confederate soldiers who fought against America, black American soldiers who fought for America, who liberated Europe, who faced discrimination while serving their country. Those soldiers were being erased, while Confederate symbols were being restored. Let me be specific about what's happening at Arlington. The monument Hegseth is restoring isn't some neutral historical marker. It's a 32-foot bronze monument commissioned by the United Daughters of the Confederacy in 1910, designed by Confederate veteran Moses Ezekiel, and dedicated by President Woodrow Wilson in 1914. Woodrow Wilson, the president who reimposed racial segregation in federal civil service, the president who screened Birth of a Nation, the pro-Ku Klux Klan film, at the White House. He dedicated this monument at the height of the Jim Crow era, when Confederate monuments were being erected across the South specifically to reinforce white supremacy and intimidate black Americans. The monument itself is remarkable for its propaganda. At the top stands a bronze woman representing the South. Below her is a frieze showing Confederate soldiers and ants. Prominently featured are two enslaved people. One is described on Arlington's own website as a mammy holding the baby of a Confederate officer. The other is an enslaved man following his master to war. These aren't neutral depictions. They're lost cause mythology in bronze. The idea that enslaved people were loyal to their masters, that they willingly supported the Confederacy, that slavery was benign. This is the sanitized, romanticized version of slavery that was promoted during Jim Crow to justify continued oppression of black Americans. The monument also features coats of arms of states that weren't even part of the Confederacy. Maryland's coat of arms is featured, even though Maryland never seceded. This was deliberate. It was meant to make the Confederacy look larger, more legitimate, more supported than it actually was. Historical propaganda, literal fake news in bronze. When the Congressional Naming Commission examined this monument in 2022, they didn't mince words. They called it a nostalgic, mythologized vision of the Confederacy, including highly sanitized depictions of slavery. They recommended removal, not because they were woke lemmings, because they were historians who understood what this monument actually represents. Retired Brigadier General Ty Seidel, who served as vice chair of that commission, was even more direct. This is the cruelest monument I've ever seen because it's pro-slavery, pro-segregation, anti-United States. It's not a reconciliation monument. It's a Confederate monument, and it's meant to say that the white South was right and the United States of America was wrong. That's what Pete Hegseth is spending $10 million to restore. a pro-slavery, pro-segregation monument that glorifies people who fought against the United States. And he's calling anyone who opposes this restoration woke lemmings. The monument was removed on December 20th, 2023, under Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. That removal was the result of years of work. In 2020, after George Floyd's murder, Congress voted to create the Naming Commission. President Trump, in his first term, vetoed the bill. Congress overrode his veto. That's how strongly lawmakers felt about this. It wasn't partisan, it was bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats agreed that Confederate symbols had no place on military property. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, the first black defense secretary in American history, implemented those recommendations, including the removal of the Arlington Confederate Memorial. And then Pete Hegseth undid it all with a social media post calling everyone involved woke lemmings. But here's where the humiliation really begins. Hegseth's announcement came at the worst possible time. Just one day earlier, on August 4th, the National Park Service announced they were restoring the Albert Pike statue in Washington, D.C. Albert Pike was a Confederate general. His statue was torn down by protesters in 2020 and set on fire. Now it's being restored and reinstalled just blocks from the U.S. Capitol. So in consecutive days, the Trump administration announced it was restoring two major Confederate monuments. The combined cost is over $10 million. $10 million to glorify people who fought against the United States. $10 million to restore monuments that sanitize slavery. And this is happening while the administration is systematically erasing black soldiers from military history. In January 2025, Pete Hegseth issued the Identity Month's Dead at Department of Defense directive. It banned Black History Month. It classified acknowledging the history of segregation and discrimination as divisive ideology. In March 2025, the Pentagon began a digital purge. 26,000 images were flagged for deletion from Defense Department websites and social media. Among them were photos of the Tuskegee Airmen, documentation of black soldiers' service, images from Black History Month events. Also in March 2025, 2 memorial panels were removed from Netherlands American Cemetery in Margraten. One honored George Pruitt, a black soldier who drowned trying to save a comrade 1 month after World War II ended. The other told how black soldiers faced segregation while fighting fascism. Those panels were removed. The Dutch were outraged. The U.S. ambassador called their criticism inappropriate and ill-informed. In June 2025, 7 Army bases had their names changed. Bases that had been renamed in 2023 to honor black soldiers were renamed again. Fort Johnson, named for Sergeant William Henry Johnson of the Harlem Hellfighters, changed. Fort Gregg Adams, named for Lieutenant General Arthur Gregg, the Army's first black 3-star general, and Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams, commander of the only all-black female battalion in World War II, changed back to Fort Lee. The pattern is clear. Black soldiers honored by Democrats are erased. Confederate symbols removed by Democrats are restored. Black History Month banned. Tuskegee Airmen photos deleted. Memorial panels removed. Confederate monuments reinstalled at Arlington. And Pete Hegseth calls anyone who objects woke lemmings. The backlash isn't just coming from Democrats. It's coming from military historians, veterans organizations. Even some Republicans are uncomfortable with this, because defending a monument that shows enslaved people as loyal to the Confederacy is hard to spin as honoring history. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia pointed out the obvious contradiction. We're removing panels about black soldiers who actually served America, while restoring monuments to people who fought against America. That's not honoring history. That's choosing which history to honor. Retired Brigadier General Ty Seidul didn't hold back. The idea of putting that monument back up is just wrong. This is not some woke thing. It's the will of the American people that Secretary Hegseth is going against. And now Hegseth's job is on the line. The Confederate monument announcement came at possibly the worst time for him politically. He was already facing questions about his leadership at the Pentagon, already dealing with scrutiny over other controversial decisions, already fighting to maintain credibility with lawmakers who have to approve Pentagon budgets and confirm military appointments. The Confederate monument restoration gave his critics ammunition. It gave moderate Republicans cover to distance themselves. It gave Democrats a clear example of exactly what they've been warning about. This isn't abstract policy debate anymore. This is $10 million for a pro-slavery monument while black soldiers get erased. That's concrete. That's defensible. That's something lawmakers can point to when they're asked whether Hegseth should remain in his position. Reports are now circulating that Trump administration officials are quietly discussing whether Hegseth can survive this, not because Trump disagrees with restoring Confederate monuments, but because Hegseth's execution was so clumsy, so blatant, so impossible to defend without explicitly endorsing the lost cause mythology. Trump likes plausible deniability. Hegseth gave him none, just a direct, woke Lemmings attack that connected Trump's administration explicitly to Confederate monument restoration while black military history was being systematically erased. That's not the kind of culture war fight Trump typically picks. He usually prefers dog whistles over megaphones, implications over explicit statements, plausible deniability over direct declarations. Hegseth eliminated all of that with one social media post, calling everyone woke Lemmings for opposing a monument that shows enslaved people as loyal to their masters. And now, Hegseth is finding out what happens when you make yourself the face of something even Trump wants to maintain distance from. When you turn a quiet policy of erasing black military history into a loud declaration that Confederate monuments deserve $10 million while black soldiers get nothing. When you eliminate the administration's ability to deny what they're actually doing, the cost is particularly galling. $10 million to restore a Confederate monument. Meanwhile, the Margrattan panels that were removed cost nothing to restore. They're already made. They're in storage with the Black Liberators Foundation. They could be reinstalled immediately, but they won't be, because they acknowledge that black soldiers faced discrimination. And acknowledging discrimination is classified as woke ideology by this administration. Let's talk about the reconciliation framing. Hegseth keeps calling this the Reconciliation Monument. That's spin. The monument was officially known as the Confederate Memorial. It was commissioned by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. It was designed by a Confederate veteran. It was dedicated by a pro-segregation president. Calling it a reconciliation monument doesn't change what it is. Real reconciliation would mean acknowledging the truth, that the Confederacy fought to preserve slavery, that Confederate soldiers were traitors who killed United States soldiers, that the lost cause mythology was propaganda designed to justify continued oppression of black Americans. Real reconciliation would mean honoring the people who actually fought for America, like the black soldiers at Margrattan whose memorial panels were removed, like Sergeant William Henry Johnson, whose name was stripped from Fort Johnson, like Lieutenant General Arthur Gregg and Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams, whose names were removed from Fort Gregg Adams. But that's not what Pete Hegseth means by reconciliation. What he means is restoring the Confederate version of history, the version where the South's cause was noble, where slavery was benign, where black people were happy in bondage. That's the history being honored with $10 million taxpayer dollars at Arlington National Cemetery, while the history of black soldiers who actually served America is being systematically erased. And here's the thing that makes this so darkly absurd. Arlington National Cemetery was established in 1864 as a cemetery for Union soldiers. It was built on the confiscated property of Robert E. Lee. The cemetery was created specifically as a statement. The Confederacy lost. The United States won. Traitors' property would be used to honor those who defended the nation. And now, over 150 years later, a Confederate monument is being restored there, on Union ground, at a cemetery created to honor those who fought against the Confederacy. But Pete Hegseth doesn't see irony. He sees culture war. He sees an opportunity to own the libs. He sees a chance to call his opponents woke Lemmings while restoring Confederate symbols. What he apparently doesn't see is how this looks to everyone else. How spending $10 million to glorify people who fought to preserve slavery, while erasing black soldiers who fought to end fascism, reveals exactly what this administration values. The humiliation isn't just about the monument, it's about the priorities. They'll spend $10 million on a Confederate monument, but they won't preserve memorial panels about black soldiers. They'll restore statues to traitors who killed American soldiers, but they'll remove the names of pioneering black generals from military bases. They'll ban Black History Month, but they'll honor Confederate history. And Pete Hegseth calls anyone who objects woke lemmings. But here's the problem for Hegseth. The lemmings metaphor doesn't work the way he thinks it does. Lemmings, according to the popular myth, follow each other blindly off cliffs. They don't question. They don't think. They just follow. And that's exactly what Hegseth is accusing his critics of doing. Following woke ideology blindly without thinking. But the actual lemmings in this scenario are the ones following Confederate lost cause mythology. Blindly. The ones who restore monuments without questioning what those monuments represent. The ones who spend $10 million glorifying slavery because Trump said Confederate symbols should be honored. The ones who erase black military history because acknowledging discrimination might hurt feelings. Pete Hegseth called his critics woke lemmings, but he's the one following Trump off a cliff. And the humiliation is that everyone can see it. The historians see it. The veterans see it. The Dutch see it. Even some Republicans see it. The Confederate Memorial will return to Arlington in 2027 after 2 years and $10 million of refurbishment. It will stand 32 feet tall, featuring a bronze woman representing the South, Confederate soldiers in heroic poses, and enslaved people depicted as loyal and content. It will display coats of arms of states that weren't even part of the Confederacy, and it will have new interpretive panels providing context. But no amount of interpretive panels changes what the monument is, and no amount of calling critics woke lemmings changes the fact that Pete Hegseth is spending $10 million to restore it while erasing actual black American heroes from military history. That's the humiliation. Not that Hegseth is being criticized, but that he apparently can't see why restoring a pro-slavery monument while removing panels about black soldiers' service reveals exactly what he values. He can't see why spending $10 million to glorify the Confederacy while banning Black History Month sends a clear message about priorities. Or maybe he can see it. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the cruelty is the purpose. Maybe erasing black soldiers while glorifying Confederate traitors isn't a contradiction at all. Maybe it's the whole strategy. Make it clear whose history matters, whose service deserves recognition, whose monuments deserve $10 million of restoration funding. The black soldiers at Margareton, who dug graves for their white comrades. The Tuskegee Airmen, whose photos are being deleted from Pentagon websites. Sergeant William Henry Johnson, Lieutenant General Arthur Gregg, Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams, whose names are being stripped from military bases. They don't get $10 million. They don't get monuments. They get erasure. They get called divisive. They get classified as woke ideology. But Confederate soldiers who fought to preserve slavery? Who killed United States troops? Who committed treason against their country? They get monuments. They get honored. They get $10 million of taxpayer funding to restore symbols glorifying their cause. And Pete Hegseth calls anyone who objects woke lemmings. That's the scandal. That's the humiliation. That's what this administration has chosen to fight for. Confederate monuments over black soldiers' memory. Lost cause mythology over historical truth. $10 million for traitors while heroes are erased. The monument will return to Arlington in 2027. But the damage is already done. The pattern is clear. The priorities are obvious. The values are revealed. Black soldiers erased. Confederate monuments restored. Black History Month banned. Tuskegee Airmen deleted. Memorial panels removed. Confederate statues reinstalled. And calling critics woke lemmings doesn't change any of that. It just makes the humiliation worse, because it shows that Pete Hegseth either doesn't understand why people are outraged or doesn't care. Either he can't see the contradiction in erasing black heroes while glorifying Confederate traitors, or he sees it perfectly and considers it a feature rather than a bug. The Confederate Memorial returns to Arlington in 2027. The memorial panels to black soldiers at Margretton remain removed. $10 million spent. Heroes erased. Traitors honored. And Pete Hegseth calling everyone else lemmings, following Trump's orders off the cliff of credibility. That's what happens when you spend more energy defending Confederate monuments than honoring the black soldiers who actually served America. The woke Lemming attack went wrong, because it revealed more about Pete Hegseth than it did about his critics, and that revelation is damning.